Before we get started, this video was a request by one of the wonderful Subscribe Star Bros, and this video is one hell of a rabbit hole, full of vodka, Slavic depression, and trippy ass concepts. It's time to enter the zone.
Но моего вы меня не отнимайте, у меня и так все отняли там, за колючей проволокой.
Stalker. So to get out of the way, Stalker is one of the biggest cult franchises out there. Based on the short story Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers, the basic concept is that there's a mysterious phenomenon developing somewhere in Eastern Europe. Suddenly, the laws of physics just stop working and the entire area is quarantined, now referred to as the Zone. Few living beings are willing to risk the dangers to explore the landscape, referred to as stalkers, and they search around for various artifacts worth their weight in gold back in the normal world. And some even search the zone for an entity rumored to grant wishes. So it's basically Alice in Wonderland, only instead of a caterpillar that smokes opium, you have Sergey. He sells AK-47s and smokes meth. Stalker has had multiple entries. You have the original short story, and the world-famous video game franchise, and the 1979 film adaptation that we're focusing on today. Now, what makes Stalker as a franchise interesting is that each medium has a completely different vibe and concept behind how they handle the zone. Roadside Picnic is about aliens, and how their technology is so advanced that their leftover trash is light years ahead of anything we see on Earth. Stalker, the video game, rewrites it to be more of the result of a second Chernobyl disaster and some psychoscience babble. Really, the games are about immersing yourself in the ruins of the Chernobyl power plant and the area around it. Still, you have horrific mutants, mind-bending anomalies, and artifacts that shatter reality by their very presence. It's a mixture of grounded gunfights between Slavs, also known as a Russian snowball fight, and fighting off the legions of hell. Also, just sitting by a campfire, listening to some dude you don't even know strum a guitar. Stalker, the video games, have a massive following that's extremely loyal. For good reason, because despite the jank and at times brutal levels of bugs, there's heart and soul in the games. It's something that people have dumped thousands of hours into, and everyone's sitting on pins and needles for Stalker 2, which has gotten fucked over by the recent conflict between Russia and Ukraine in more ways than one, even losing one of the devs to the war. Edward Starr remains correct to this very day. Still, the team is going full speed ahead on the game and plan on releasing it soon, and Roadside Picnic remains a massively influential story for Eastern European science fiction, inspiring not just video games, but franchises like Metro 2033, which has direct references and even uses similar terminology to Stalker.
In fact, some of the developers from Shadows of Chernobyl went on to develop 4A Studios, who developed the Metro 2033 video games.
Darkwood, a Polish horror game, has heavy inspiration from Stalker and uses a similar concept of quarantine hellscape where reality breaks down and nothing makes sense. The Final Station, while being more of a straight-up zombie game, still includes details of a brief visit by aliens shaking the world and causing reality-bending phenomenon, though probably the most famous adaptation beyond the Stalker games is Annihilation from 2018, which is much closer to Roadside Picnic than is Shadows of Chernobyl. I have some strong feelings on this movie, but I'll save it for the end. There was also supposed to be a mini-series adapting the book, but it was killed by Soviet censors, as in they literally destroyed every single copy after the pilot. I love the Soviet Union. They show respect and appreciate the preservation of art. But what I want to talk about today is the movie by Andrei Tarkovsky. 1979 Stalker is such a different beast than something like the book or the games, to the point that it's a rabbit hole all of its own. Now, Andrei Tarkovsky is a very interesting director. He was a Soviet director that made a lot of acclaimed art films. Solaris is probably his most famous beyond Stalker, as it's referred to as one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. But Stalker was something he had a lot of faith in, working right alongside the Strugatsky brothers to adapt Roadside Picnic. At first he wanted to adapt Dead Mountaineers Hotel, but the project fell through, and instead switched to Roadside after a conversation with Arkady Strugatsky.
Dead Mountaineers Hotel was adapted by Grigory Kromenov after Tarkovsky left the project. It came out the same year as Stalker.
Now, Stalker as a film differs from the book in some pretty major ways. For one, the focus on the world-bending artifacts and more out there concepts in the zone are dialed back. Instead, the film is very character-focused, following 3 men as they infiltrate the zone in order to reach a rumored entity in the center that grants the user their secret desire. The story is written to explore the men, what they believe in, rather than any kind of life-threatening situation. They still happen, but it's much more grounded. Time dilation and suggestions of horrible fate, rather than anything you explicitly see. This movie is an art film. It's very slow-paced and more about bigger ideas. So if you go in wanting to see gun battles, this is not for you. The whole movie is just 3 guys walking around talking to each other. Now what they say is very interesting, and it's a movie you want to keep your brain on as you watch. That's not to say it's some cryptic puzzle that's impossible to decipher. Tarkovsky himself was adamantly against that. In fact, Stalker, the film, is very upfront about its themes. It's like a classic folktale. The theme impacts every event and every conversation, so it's really hard not to see if you're paying attention. Doubly so on a rewatch. Hell, the characters don't even have names, they have titles. The writer, the professor, the stalker. They are figures that represent different aspects of people and how they react to the zone. Everything about the film is about pushing the theme. Even the cinematography is all about this. The scenes in the Soviet Union are so oppressive and dirty. Every building looks run down, covered in mud. You see soldiers at checkpoints all over the place. It's all looking like it's barely held together. The scenes where a train rolls past shake everything in the stalker's house, like a fucking earthquake. His life is barely held together to the point the slightest shake could topple everything. There's not even any color, shot in black and white with a slight yellow tint that makes it feel toxic. You just don't feel happy looking at it. Meanwhile, in contrast, the zone is full of color. There's so much more nature and beauty. Even the ruins of buildings are overtaken by woods and greenery, to the point they sort of just start fusing together. Now I kept mentioning it before, so what exactly is the theme of Stalker? Well, the simple answer is faith. You see, the Soviet Union had a policy of state atheism put in place. It was actually illegal to be religious, since the communist government saw that as an influence that would affect people's loyalty to the state, and this is a policy Tarkovsky himself heavily disagreed with. He was a very spiritual man, willing to pay tribute to religious figures and quote biblical scripture in his films, even getting into heated fights with the state censors over this. It's one of the reasons he was outright banished from the Soviet Union for the rest of his career, as he fought to keep criticisms of state atheism in his film The First Day, which was about Peter the Great. The State Committee for Cinematography, also known as Goskino, found out that Tarkovsky submitted an alternate script for approval than what was actually being shot, so they canned the film halfway through, and Tarkovsky, in rage, destroyed the rest of the film, essentially going off the idea that if he couldn't make it how he wanted, then no one gets to have it. Which, not gonna lie, is pretty respectable. Still, Tarkovsky would go back and forth with the state censors, to the point he fled to Italy for the rest of his career, convinced that he could never return to the Soviet Union, since they would constantly get in the way of his filmmaking. And Stalker has some very pointed criticisms towards the Soviet government and its policies. Tarkovsky himself denied that the film was really intended to be a political piece, and anything that's there is just coincidental. Stalker as a film isn't really meant to be an explicitly political movie, instead using the setting as just an all-around representation of an oppressive world that sucks away people's humanity and hope. It just so happens it was the Soviet Union in real life. Yeah, there's absolutely some political commentary in the film, even using slang that famously referred to gulags, such as the meat grinder, to talk about life-threatening situations in the zone. And the stalker himself has a shaved head, styled after gulag prisoners. It's not explicit or anything directly mentioned, except that one scene, and is something you just sort of pick up on. Instead, the film is much more about universal human nature, of desire and what the true character of a person is. The story is simple, yes, but the simplicity is used to talk about much heavier ideas, because the characters each represent different sides of society and perspectives on people. But before we go any further, I'm going to put up a spoiler warning for Stalker. It's a long commitment, over 2 hours and 40 minutes, but still, it's a fantastic film with a lot to say. Sit down and give it a watch. So for instance, the writer is a cynic. He's open to the supernatural, but only in the sense of how he can exploit it for his stories, to use as inspiration instead of any real respect. He's burned out by people, at first being much more naive and sincere, but he's beaten down by critics and journalists picking apart anything he does. He's lost any hope he's once had and just accepts that the world is boring and miserable, now just writing what people want to see instead of truly expressing himself. The professor, on the other hand, needs to understand the zone, to know what it is, what it's capable of. He's fully convinced it is dangerous and blames it for the reason for societal issues, such as rising crime and destructive science. As much as he seems like a rational man at first, claiming that he only wants to go in to receive a Nobel Prize, in truth, he He's completely drunk off his own view and biased towards the zone, and flagrantly breaks rules inside of it. The Stalker himself is meant to be the common man, someone beaten down by the Soviet Union. As stated, his haircut is meant to be the shaved head that Gulag prisoners had, and he just got out of prison and is looking for work. He's much more hopeful and desperate for purpose, which he sees with the zone. While the writer and professor fear it, the Stalker genuinely loves the zone. It gives him freedom that he just doesn't have in the outside world, and he even considers moving his wife and daughter inside of it despite the danger it holds. He's been inside the zone multiple times and knows how to explore it with minimal risk. While he loves it, he also holds a level of fear for it, though it manifests much more as a sense of respect. He needs the zone and sees it as the one thing giving people purpose, giving himself purpose. Since the wish granter at the center is real, it's simply referred to as the room. Once you enter it, you will receive your hidden desire. You cannot lie to it or demand a treasure. The room will give you what you want deep down, regardless of your will. So the story revolves around the risks of a room that gives people whatever they want, and what kind of person would risk life and limb to enter the zone to reach it in the first place. There's debates around what would happen if an evil man entered the zone, how the zone works, and subtle explanations for how the zone formed in the first place. You never really get clear answers on anything. There's a single scene where you see a trap in the zone go off, and one scene showing how the zone affected the children born near it when it first formed. Because the supernatural in the film is used much more for the debate about people, and specifically how faith and spiritualism is seen by different groups. There's blatant comparisons between the zone and religion. They quote scripture in the zone, you see faded images of religious figures, the writer puts on a crown of thorns similar to what Jesus wore on the cross. There's hints that it's meant to represent religion and God. The way the Stalker acts in the zone is similar to how someone who would worship a god would act. He loves it, it gives him purpose and joy, and he's also scared of what it's capable of, knowing that any sin committed will be punished. He talks as if it's a living being, watching over the men and judging them for their actions. The scene where the rider walks into a trap shows that he was about to be killed for breaking a rule, walking through the meat grinder and leaving the others behind when the Stalker explicitly told him not to. And he was only spared after giving a monologue admitting to his own repressed unhappiness. It's essentially an act of confessional, how he feels as though the world and society is stomping on his sincerity and leaving him as an empty shell. The zone judges him as sincere and allows him to live, though throughout the rest of the story, the writer is terrified, now seeing the zone as nothing but dangerous, and the Stalker an egotistical hypocrite that puts people at risk to give himself purpose. He can't help but see the worst parts of it all due to his own cynicism, losing faith in the world, and thus losing faith in the zone. It's like someone who lost faith in God and can only see the worst parts of religion, the zealotry and murder instead of the charity and hope. He's not a bad man, a tad arrogant and short-sighted, it's just how he sees the world now. The professor is the opposite. From the word go, he never liked the zone. He fears it, what it's capable of, and the idea of a truly evil man being given everything he wants from the room. He's a man of science and logic, so the reality-warping nature of the zone already puts him on edge. But the knowledge of a wish granter giving anyone their hidden desire puts it into overdrive, believing it must be responsible for why the Soviet Union is falling apart, bringing a bomb into the zone to destroy the room so no one else can have it. But it's revealed that he's petty. His entire journey was motivated out of personal vengeance against another scientist that was studying the zone and who slept with his wife. The professor touts himself as an objective observer who simply desires to learn and understand, but he had no intentions of ever learning in the first place. He thinks he's right and nobody will ever convince him otherwise, even as the Stalker walks them through the zone and explains how much it can help those that feel as if life is meaningless, with no hope in living agonizing lives. The professor would rather destroy something he doesn't understand, calling it destructive science, when it's motivated by his own personal vendetta. He's not a straw man or painted as 100% wrong. There is a risk of someone's desire harming the larger world around them, but the Stalker just doesn't see it that way. The way he describes the zone, you can't trick it or go in with an alternative motive. You are given your true desire, plain and simple. The desire you think about so much it hurts. What your soul truly yearns for. A story the movie brings up is the character of Porcupine. He was a fellow Stalker that worked alongside the Stalker and journeyed into the zone with his brother. At first, the story was described as him receiving great fortune and then hanging himself out of guilt. For a long time, it's just left as this, but after the meat grinder scene, it's fully laid out. Porcupine entered the zone to resurrect a dead relative and received the money instead, so he killed himself. And to make it worse, the relative who died was his brother. Porcupine sent him into the meat grinder and the zone killed him. Porcupine thought he could just resurrect his brother once he reached the room, but that wasn't his true desire. It was to become wealthy. so he sacrificed his brother for his own gain, and his gift from the room ends up being an ironic punishment. He got exactly what he wanted, no strings attached, but he couldn't live with the guilt. The writer misinterprets this as meaning the meat grinder needs a sacrifice to get past, but that's just not how it works. It's just an extremely dangerous trap meant to guard the room. You either get past it or you don't, but somebody needs to go first. The zone pays attention to the behavior of those that enter it. If you show respect and follow the rules, it will leave you be. It's still very dangerous, but how you act in the zone affects how it reacts. It's why there's so many scenes of the Stalker explaining the rules to the others, because you need to respect the zone when you're inside of it. It's not judging good and bad people, like what the writer assumes at first, and more just your humility. Are you willing to suck up your own pride and truly commit yourself to the journey? Because if you aren't dedicated enough to just shut up and listen to the Stalker, then you aren't truly desperate for your wish, and you will be punished as such. In the end, each of the men opt out of the journey, just outside of the room but too scared to enter it. The Stalker admits that he does feel a sense of pride and joy bringing people into the zone, but he doesn't do it to make money or to make himself feel powerful. It's because he knows what it's like to be hopeless and wants to save others from that feeling. He's a genuine and altruistic man, hurt by the cynicism of the other two and lamenting that the world at large is losing faith. It's getting harder and harder to find people who deserve to enter the zone, since they have no more hope to give. The Stalker's wife is one of the few characters that shares his viewpoint, swearing that she'll leave him if he goes on another journey at the beginning of the film, only to still be with him at the very end, swearing that she appreciates her life with him even with all the pain and misery that comes with being married to a Stalker. The Stalker and his wife are the average Joe who have nothing but faith and hope that life will get better, because even as tragedy mounts around them, what do they have? The professor and the writer don't need the hope that the zone brings to the Stalker. They're successful in their fields. Unhappy, yes, but they have the luxury of arrogance, of believing they're above the zone and have it all figured out, that their cynicism is the same thing as intelligence. Meanwhile, their viewpoints are mired by bias. They don't know everything, and they don't understand how important purpose is to the average man. They need something to believe in and get them out of bed in the morning. The only one we see with a family is the Stalker. The writer has flings with women, and the professor talks about having a wife, but the only family we see on screen is the Stalker's. His wife and daughter are on his mind through the whole movie, and he worries a lot for them. He leads people into the zone not just because of self-satisfaction, but because, yeah, it does pay well. The work is dangerous and inconsistent, but the money is hard to turn down because it helps his family. His sincerity is why the wife sticks by him even at the end of the film, because she knows he's not doing it for his own selfish gain. He truly does love the world and his family. He's just tired of cynicism and feels as if humanity is squandering a gift given to them in the form of the room. It's treacherous, but that's what makes it worthwhile. The monologue at the end given by the wife really explains the philosophy behind the movie and how it views the zone. The journey means so much because it's dangerous. If it was easy, what would even be the point of the room? It wouldn't have any weight or mean anything. Yes, there are tragedies. Yes, there are horrifying stories around the zone, but that's the world at large anyway, full of agony and hardship. I mean, look at how much of a dystopia the rest of the setting actually is. Even men like the professor and the writer have their share of painful memories, so why focus on the negative aspects of the zone when there's so much beauty and good inside of it? It's what makes Stalker such an interesting beast compared to the book or the games. There's an inherent draw to the zone. It's not good or evil, it simply is. While it can be scary, there's parts of the zone that look beautiful. There's still life inside of it, animals roaming around. It's not a moral relativism argument of you simply don't understand the zone's perspective like some idiots on Twitter love spouting for the sake of it. No, the zone is truly a neutral entity. It has its rule set. It's affected by the people inside of it. It judges you based on who you are and how you act. Stalker as a movie is a character study of how this situation brings out the best and worst in people. It's so different when you consider the cynicism of the book and games, which do dip into misanthropy, that the movie directly comments on and combats, which is why it's such a funny addition to the franchise. Everything else focuses on gun battles and science fiction horror aspects, and the movie is all about humanity, about how something like the zone could actually benefit mankind and give beaten down, tired people something to fight for. But even then, there are some that are so cynical that they just can't accept that it exists and that's truly what it is. They have to find a flaw. They have to find a reason to dismiss it. They have to find a reason to destroy it. I highly recommend Stalker as a film. It's a phenomenal movie, though very out there and different. It's not an easy watch. It's very long, and there can be minutes-long scenes where no one speaks. You have to take the film seriously and pay attention. But if you vibe with the movie, this is something that can stick in your brain for a very long time. It's not as abstract as something like Paranoia Agent, but the concepts it handles reach into some top-tier moments. Please give the film a watch. It's something that's been praised to hell and back, which is funny because this is the film that might have been the reason Tarkovsky died. They filmed scenes by a leaking chemical plant, and so production could have contributed to terminal lung cancer that killed Tarkovsky years later. And this is all made all the more foreboding by one of the final scenes taking place by a power plant, both being what killed Tarkovsky, and the film was released 7 years before the Chernobyl disaster. Chernobyl being a worldwide disaster and the direct inspiration for the Stalker video games. It's freaky as hell when you think about it. Now, I mentioned I would talk about Annihilation. So Annihilation is the 2018 sci-fi horror movie written and directed by Alex Garland. So right from the get-go, there's actually some major misconceptions about this movie. It's not actually a Roadside Picnic adaptation. It's an adaptation of a novel by the same name that came out in 2014 that's, only kinda sorta like Roadside Picnic, because it's also about a quarantine zone where an alien presence is starting to shift reality. Yeah, everyone kind of knows that there's some heavy Stalker inspirations here, and I will count it, because a lot of people do name drop Annihilation in the same vein as other adaptations of Stalker. And all I will say is that if you want to watch it as an adaptation of Roadside Picnic, it does miss a lot of the points. There's too much of a heavy emphasis on the militaristic science aspect of it, where you have teams of Alpha Bravo Delta team going in to secure the objective and go to Point Bravo and that kind of shit. While at the same time, not allowing the characters to be professional soldiers. They are damaged women who have their own problems going in for their own personal gain, which works perfectly by itself as a Roadside Picnic thing. But tying it to the military operation now means they have to explain why the United States government would send in an elite team of women who have cancer or are depressed or suicidal. There's some heavy plot holes here with this story, which once again, Roadside Picnic and Stalker solved because, yeah, it was very upfront with the fact that a lot of the people going into the zone were black market. They were smugglers, they were thieves, they were people who broke in past military checkpoints. The entire half of the original movie was them trying to break into the zone. Now granted, everybody involved with production denies up and down that there was any connection to Roadside Picnic, or, Color Out of Space, which is another thing you can kind of point to with all this. However, once again, it's something where you just kind of feel it as you watch it. I think there's a little bit of twisting of details and not being completely honest about all the influences here, because some of it was pretty direct. Now, I will say, visually, the movie is fantastic. There are some really creative segments, special effects are on point, and there's some scares that genuinely get under your skin. Seeing the fungus people was freaky. The guy with his guts moving around inside of him is freaky. It has good ideas for how to get under your skin, in your head, and make you feel uncomfortable. The problem is, there's not really any larger connective tissue beyond that. Now, as stated, Roadside Picnic and Stalker, the original movie, did have things they wanted to say. Roadside Picnic was about the possibility of aliens having technology so far beyond us that even the things they considered wasteful objects could break our world. And the original movie was about the nature of people and how they react. It kind of felt like Annihilation couldn't decide between the two. Did it want to be about the spectacle alien stuff, or did it want to be a character study like it was teasing with some of the characters? Also, there's some pretty blatant Hollywoodisms in the movie, like ending it with blowing up the big scary monster and a big spectacle thing, and oh, it looks like the zone is finally gone, only for there to be a twist where it's like, nope, maybe it's still there, maybe it's gonna consume the world. It kind of felt a little, condescending. A little bit. I guess the best way to describe it is Annihilation is for people who like Stalker, the video games, and Stalker is for people who like Stalker, the movie. One focuses a lot more on spectacle action, on cosmic horror, and different kind of mutated monsters and different designs of nightmares come to life, and it does do a good job at that. I will say that. There was a lot of effort there. But the other is for people who want to actually think more about the zone. Think about what it could mean. Is it even inherently a bad thing? What are the positives that can come from it? Who are the people that want to explore it? That kind of thing. That's not to say one is dumb and the other is smart, it's just different intentions here. And if you're a fan of Roadside Picnic, you've probably already touched every single version of it. So you've already played the games, you've already watched the Soviet movie, you've probably already sat down and watched Annihilation. So yeah, you kind of have your own judgment to go from there. Still, that's all I have to say about Stalker. Please give this franchise a shot, even if you don't really think it's your thing. You'd be amazed how much you can appreciate, especially if you're a fan of the book or the games or what have you. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
Все, завязывай.
Мастер!
Молодец.
Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.